Laura. It's so glad to have you on the We Rise podcast. Thanks so much for joining today. Will you introduce yourself so folks know who I have the delight of speaking to?
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Mm.
My name's Laura. I'm an activist, a coach, and I'm a founder of an online school for change makers called Public Love Education. And, this is really for anybody who wants to make a difference in the world. So, our programs focus on the inner work of change making and what are the conditions we need to create within us and within our communities to foster social healing and collective thriving. And
Mm-hmm.
if you can hear the accent, it is because I am calling in today from Gadigal Land in Sydney, Australia.
Awesome. I love that. So, as listeners know, we'll include the links to how you can find Laura Hartley in the episode webpage. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit more about how folks can learn more about your work. But, Laura, tell us a little bit about how you got to this point. And, I'd love that you are leading out with the fact that our inner change has to take place so that we can do the outer work. It so often comes around the opposite for folks. People work so hard to do the outer change, get really tired and burned out, and then find, oh, what can I actually do to help strengthen my inner landscape or bring my self compassion or increase my self love? What does that look like in your own work? And tell us about how you got to this place. Tell us about your story.
Ooh. So I grew up in a house that was surrounded by personal development and spirituality and self help from a very young age. Like my earliest memories are of being in the car with my mom and wanting desperately to listen to music or the radio or anything, and instead having to hear like Wayne Dyer or Tony Robbins, Dennis Waitley, Neil Donald Walsh, whoever it might have been that day. And my mother actually, she founded one of the first life coach training schools in Australia. So, she's been kind of in this industry for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And this had a really huge influence on my life because it taught me at a very young age that I have agency,
Mm-hmm.
that I can choose my response to the world around me, and I can choose how I want to show up in the world. And it instilled in me a sense of service and a sense of moral responsibility as well, that we owe something to the world to make it a more beautiful and a more regenerative place.
Mm-hmm.
But as I got older, I entered activism, and I started to see this disconnect a little bit with the personal growth movement, that there's some wonderful teachings out there that focus on the inner work but completely ignore systemic issues or structural realities.
Yeah.
You know, they're not talking about the reality of patriarchy. They're not talking about the reality of white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
There's the law of attraction doesn't mention the damage that capitalism does to our social fabric or to the environment. And so I wasn't really sure what to do with these two different worlds that I was in. Especially I was heading into climate activism and environmental activism. And there was this question of like, how do we navigate, our grief for the world? How do we
Mm-hmm.
hold these incredible crises that we're facing?
Mm-hmm.
And activism at times also was a little bit tunnel focused. It focused purely on the structural issues. It focused on the systems and the policies and these really important things that need to change, but it missed the spiritual wound or the psyche that was actually underlying or creating these
Mm-hmm.
conditions. And so this is how I came to my work, which I'm now really referring to as like a form of cultural wayfinding. How do we actually collectively navigate to a more just and regenerative future? How do we break free of culture? How do we learn what is ours? And how do we start to make change from a really deep and embodied place so that it's both within us and is out there in the world?
Mm-hmm. I love that. So well said. My early years into activism work were very much that. I worked in as doing environmental activism work in Northern California around redwood trees, and many thousands of year old redwood trees. And the activism work was intense and focused and on and very driven and very, no justice, no compromise. And it really informed so much of my work today as a facilitator and a mediator and a consensus builder where it's appropriate. I won't mediate all situations. I won't facilitate a lot of different circumstances which that aren't appropriate to have consensus built around. But it really was a fascinating framing for me to see and watch so many friends get so burned out and to get so tapped out and to lose the energy to do the work. And what you're saying is almost two parallel tracks. Is, people maybe go to a yoga class and then do the activism work, and they were very much divorced from each other rather than an integrated approach. And it's been, I'm 44 now. It's taken many, many years to figure out that the inner work, it sounds self-serving, but the inner work has to come first for my outer work to be of true value in the world. What has your own journey looked like, Laura, as you've worked with that dance? And it's not perfect in my own life. It's sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't. But what does that look like in your life?
It is a dance, isn't it? I think it's not so much even one before the other, but the two are really intertwined. That as we learn to work on one, we learn to work on the other at the same time, or they influence each other. Like very often there's this idea, well, okay, well, I need to work on myself first. So I'm just gonna like take myself off to the mountains or like to a retreat somewhere and just be, with myself. And that has value and that has a place. Like there is a time for that. I've done it myself and I no doubt will do it again. But there's also understanding that actually it's also about how am I showing up in relationship. It is about
Mm-hmm.
the actual work and the things that are happening on the outside as well. And it's funny you touched on burnout there because that was actually one of my introductions to this work.
Mm-hmm.
I have my own experience with burnout, having also been in activism. Seeing the burnout rate is just incredible.
Mm-hmm.
You have amazing people so passionate about changing the world enter activism, and within a year they're burnt out and they're stressed. And this was me as well. So really noticing, okay, what was actually driving this? Where was I starting to or trying to make change from the same place and that same energy that actually I'm wanting to disrupt?
Mm-hmm.
I refer to something called internalized capitalism, which is, essentially is like the equation of our worth with our value with our productivity or with what we produce.
Mm-hmm.
So that I'm only valuable when I'm doing X, Y, or Z. And then you see it show up when we push ourselves to keep working at midnight, when we go to work when we're sick, when we feel guilty for resting or taking time off.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get this constant energy of always needing to be moving. And I had this for years. I still have this. Like, I am not completely free of this. I've come a long way and I get free now when I notice it. But this feeling of scarcity and this feeling of needing to hustle kind of drove me for a large part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes in environmental activism when I would just be exhausted and I would see the urgency of the crises that we're facing. And so I would hop on every meeting and every action and every opportunity to do something until eventually, you kind of have nothing left.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's again part of like my journey towards, well, actually, what is the work that we need to do inside ourselves here? Where does the inner work come to play? Because we're all trying to make incredible change here, but we're all doing it using the same energy that we're trying to disrupt or we're trying to dismantle.
Mm-hmm. That's, yeah, fascinating. So Laura, you said something about freeing yourself when you notice, and awareness is the entry point for so much, whatever it is. But you said when you notice you're in that hustle mode, or in that equating your sense of self-worth with productivity, you didn't use that exact language, but to that effect, and you notice when you can free yourself. How do you do that? What does that look like for you?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think it's, as you said, it starts with the awareness, but then it starts with then also making another choice, to actually notice what is happening in my body right now. A lot of that mentality that's driving us is happening, it's very neck up. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
all in our head and in our thoughts. And then like if we actually like tune into our body, which took me a long time to learn how to do, you know, we're like, oh my God, it's like so stressed and so uncomfortable and so on edge. And like learning then to actually, okay, no, we're safe, we're good, like let's slow down, let's create a different choice here, let's come back to my body and let my body guide me in what to do next. Because when I'm kind of working from a place of my head or my thoughts as my next step, as to what I am supposed to do, all those things that I should do, all those things that, if I was a good partner, if I was a good activist, if I was a good entrepreneur, if I was a good whatever it is I would be doing, then I'm leading myself usually in this same mentality, in this same path towards burnout.
Mm-hmm.
Coming back to stopping, pausing, reflecting, creating that safety in my body, like knowing that actually I'm good. There's nothing happening right now. I'm not going to die. You
Mm-hmm.
know, nobody is going to reject me. I'm all okay where I am.
Yeah,
Then
absolutely.
it can lead me as to where I'm supposed to go next.
Mm-hmm. So that listening to your body, integrating the whole experience, not just the neck up, neck down. I love that one of my teachers, Tara Brock, talks about bowing your head below your heart. You know, that idea that the mind has so much attention. And it
Mm.
sounds like having choice and having the ability to make a different choice in how you move forward. So, as we broaden the view a little bit, Laura, and step out, tell us about how you work with community. You know, what changes have you seen with either the climate activism community that you've worked with over time or in folks who are part of your education programs? You know, what have you seen around resilience, where resilience has grown, where it hasn't grown, in communities you work with?
Mm. I love this topic of resilience, you know, but I think when I'm talking about resilience and I'm talking about communities, I think it's important that we also clarify what resilience is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so often we mistake it for endurance.
Mm.
And, you know, resilience is not endurance. Resilience is a product of thriving. You know, it's kind of like when we have like a hairband or an elastic band, that we think of it as something that should kind of expand or stretch and grow and then come back. But what happens when those hard times, those crises that keep driving the expansion that we have and that rubber band don't actually stop, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we're facing today, whether it's, you know, climate change, droughts, fires, floods, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's war, whether it's inflation, you know, there are just continual crises that keep coming at us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're not really getting that experience to come back, which means we're kind of just referring to resilience as endurance. You know, look how resilient you are to just keep doing that thing that you're doing. You know, you just keep pushing, just keep going. You know, it's a little bit toxic in a way because I think
Mm-hmm.
that it just kind of glorifies tolerating situations and lives and circumstances that we don't actually enjoy. And instead, you know, thriving is really when we're returning to our natural state, when we're coming back more expanded, when we're coming back bigger, bolder, larger than we were before. So in activism and in change making, this tends to get missed. You know, when we're dealing with hard work, when we're dealing with individual problems, when we're dealing with global crises and we're facing them every single day, the scale becomes overwhelming. And we just end up living out here in that constant stretched, expanded zone, you know, until eventually it's going to snap and it's going to break. And that's what burnout is. Now, I have seen this in a lot of different spaces and I've seen this in myself. And what I do like about communities now is there is a reflection and there is an understanding that resilience is much more linked to nourishment, it's much more linked to belonging, that it's not just an individual failing to burn out, it's not just an individual problem. There is kind of this growing actual acceptance that it's about how we come together. The burnout is a system problem, it's a collective problem, and it's not just on one person who like couldn't hack it or like, you know, couldn't keep up with the rat race or whatever it is that we tell ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I've noticed that in climate circles, this kind of coming together to reimagine how we want to be together. So
Mm-hmm.
I find that really exciting to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And you know, it's interesting in the way that I look at resilience and we look at resilience in our work with communities. So the work I'm primarily engaged with is helping communities and regions envision their future and find tools and resources to make it happen. And that is often where people have the ability to put food on the table. You know, I think that there's like it needs to be named that when people are having a hard time putting food on the table, it's hard to be part of community processes and community groups, and that's just a whole other level of community support that needs to take place to enable folks to be able to come to the table, if you will. But in those communities that have struggled over time, so you know, certainly social resilience and environmental resilience, but economic resilience, but focusing at this community scale resilience, the thing that I have found to be almost the most difficult, but the most beautiful is that struggle when there's a shock of some sort, when there's some kind of struggle, what's learned in that struggle. You know, folks talk about bouncing back, but we talk about bouncing forward, whether that's an individual or community. What's learned in that struggle is where the magic happens. And that's where the potential for transformation and growth is. It's what's learned in that struggle. If communities are willing to say, wow, that was really hard and difficult and sucked, but look how we've been transformed as a community through it. But it's difficult. You know, we don't have spaces of collective grieving often in many modern cultures. We don't have spaces to be able to hold our own internal grief or the collective grief. And it doesn't always look like grief. But sometimes it does, and sometimes it comes out in confusing ways. And so I think for me, that resilience is often where we learn through the struggle and where we have the ability to thrive, but also to be able to be more rooted and grounded to grow into a brighter future, and not in a Pollyanna-ish way, in a way that's rooted in what people really want to see. What have you seen around how folks in Australia or other places are coming together to create the future you want? Are you seeing that happening more in your work as a coach or not? It's a
I
strange
am
question,
seeing it.
but
Yeah, and you know, I think the Australia part of that question is still a little bit like, I'm definitely not seeing this as much as I would like. You
mm,
know, we like many countries have a long way to go in creating the type of society that I actually think many of us want, even when we don't know how to articulate it.
mm-hmm,
There has been some progress in recent years, I think, particularly starting to reflect on values and, you know, what an economy that's kind of shifting away from endless economic growth could look like.
mm-hmm,
That conversation is totally in its infancy,
mm-hmm,
but it is actually starting in different parts of the world, and that's
mm-hmm,
exciting.
mm-hmm,
But in terms of my coaching and the people that I'm working with, and, you know, there's people all over the world in very different communities, yeah, there is this exciting thing where I think people are starting to reimagine what it is that they want for their world, reimagine what it is that they want for their lives, and they're starting to make the changes that they need in order to move in that direction.
mm-hmm,
What's what's been really exciting for me lately is I've been running these free interviews and coaching calls to help create this cultural wayfinding program that I'm developing and launching very soon.
mm-hmm,
And so I've had, you know, lots of different calls with lots of different people. And, you know, when we're looking to make change in the world, I tend to divide it into three areas. There's disrupting, you know, this could be like direct action, it could be the legal field, it could be journalism. There's really like shining a light to the things that are happening. There's aiding and there's healing, you know, there's really helping the people who are impacted by systems as they are. And then there's building, you know, creating the structures that are going to outlast these current ones as they fall.
mm-hmm,
And, you know, as I've been having these calls with people, there have been lots of people who are actually going, you know what? I am working in the disruption field and this is not working for me anymore. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I feel like I keep butting up against the system and I'm not making any sort of difference. And then they realize actually, oh, what I want to be doing is building. You know, what I want to be doing is aiding.
mm-hmm,
And then by realizing that there's that different part that they are supposed to be working in, they're transitioning over there and they're starting to do really exciting things. You know,
mm-hmm,
that whether it's looking at food supplies and food systems, whether it's looking at new forms of governing, whether it's looking at some sort of mutual aid system that they want to develop where they are, there's opportunities that are starting to flourish when that clarity comes and when they've done the work to also create, as you say, that sense of groundedness, that sense of, okay, I'm here, I'm in my body, I'm in my place, you know, I've got my land, this is where I am.
mm-hmm,
And going forward into, well, what do I want to create next?
mm-hmm. Love that. I love that. That grounded place is so important to be able to look from. And sometimes the groundlessness is also important to create internal disruptions in our own lives, and it's an iterative cycle. Laura, tell
The
us a little.
groundlessness is unavoidable. It's part
It,
of life. It's
right,
it's
it
it's
is.
it's the unfortunate
Well
thing that will
said.
just keep coming.
It is. And the more we fight it, the groundlessness, the more groundless it becomes almost. So, how do you work with folks? Tell us a little bit about what your coaching looks like, or really what are you helping them to uncover in your work?
Yeah. So, you know, a lot of my work essentially is, you know, it's kind of personal development with systemic analysis. You know, so how do we actually create a more just and regenerative future, not only in our own lives, so doing work that we care about, having lives that give us meaning, having the experiences that we want to have and the relationships that we want to have, while also actually creating the world that we want to have. Because, you know, it's not enough in today's day to really focus purely on ourselves or on what we want. Now, This doesn't mean we need everybody to be the traditional activists. This doesn't mean we need everybody to, drop everything and pick up a medical degree or a law degree or a journalism degree or whatever it might be. We need people in every single different field starting to reimagine what it is that's right for them. We need people following their callings and doing what's true for them. So I help people kind of come back to their body compass, come back to what is true for them. So how do we explore? We have a bit of a analysis and questions and reflections and coaching around, where is this me and my beliefs and my truth? And where is this patriarchy? Where is this culture? Where is this just internalized capitalism? Okay, so when we kind of get free of culture, what do we know what to do then? Well, let's go to our body. Let's learn to use our body, which is a really profound source of truth that we carry with us all of the time, to direct us towards our next step. So I work with people one-on-one through coaching, but I also have a couple of groups that I run as well. So one is called Internal Revolution, which is really focusing on burnout. It kind of looks at all the different components that go into burnout and resilience and what it would be like to start to thrive again. And I also run another that will be on business beyond capitalism, exploring entrepreneurship without capitalism. And of course, the new one that's launching cultural wayfinding. So, which is essentially this premise. Let's create a different world together and get free.
I love that. So, different ways that you're working with folks, and what, how are you helping people move from burnout to thriving? What does that look like?
It's not an overnight journey. I'll say that. There's, I wish it was. I wish I had created like such a program that you could like snap a button and suddenly like you're great. But it's really about actually one, letting people explore what it is that's led them to this point of burnout in their lives. What are the conditions within me and within the communities and cultures that I was working that have led to this? And then it's working through a series of processes. So it's working first through the body to create that sense of safety, that sense of belonging, learning to check in with ourselves again, because when we're burnt out, we tend to live very neck up. Our body is uncomfortable, it's sore, and we have ignored red flags there for a long time. So learning to reconnect is a process. And we're starting to look at, our needs, our desires, whether our lives are actually fulfilling us, because as long as we keep doing things that are driven by our shoulds, driven by all of those things that we're supposed to do, then we're going to burn out. So, what is it that we actually want to do? What is calling us? What is speaking to us? For activists, I also look at this story behind change making as well. We often carry a story that we're supposed to save the world or fix the world, and it's a very common one in climate spheres. But that story still carries this element of danger, this element of threat, this us versus them mentality. There's a lot of different power dynamics in that often still lead to stress. And what would it be like to do the work, not from saving the world, but from loving it, from service, from a more regenerative foundation? And then lastly, we look at communities. We look at the culture that we're in, the microcultures of our organizations, our families, whatever it might be. And, where's our value in that? Are we putting our value on what we do, what we produce, what we offer each other, or is it on who we are? What's our relationship to time like? Are we constantly scarce? Are we constantly feeling like there's just never enough time? Or can we actually come back to something that's much more cyclical, that honors the seasons, that honors the natural earth, that honors the way that, our bodies were really designed to live and to be? So it's a longer process, that program. And it's not an overnight or a one-time fix, but really about empowering change makers with the tools to reimagine how they want to do activism and what is important to them in their lives, so that they can go forward from, a stronger place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of folks I work with who are coaches or are working in community spaces hold space for others. They're often tending, helping to grow, shape, helping draw out from others. Or what's your vision? What's your vision for, the future of your community, however you define that? And I say however you define it because we talked about you have a continental move coming up soon, and so the future of your community, I invite that at your, could be geography or it could be social spaces. What would you say? What is the future that you envision?
Yeah, community is such an interesting term. For me, it really is all of the people that are within my orbit.
Mm-hmm.
Because, yeah, my community, some of it's geographical here in Sydney, some of it is overseas, some of it's in different places. I think my vision is, or my wish, my dream,
Mm-hmm.
my intention for all of us is to get free from all of those things that we think we are supposed to do. It is to get free from those toxic elements of culture and to return to what is true for us.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the essence of a lot of spiritual teachings. It's the essence of a lot of personal development teachings. And I also think it's the essence of the kind of change that we really need to heal the world. When we're looking at the scale of crises that we're facing, it's not just about a policy change. It's not just about switching to renewables. There is a mentality within us as humans that needs to change. And what we see, both in myself, in my community, in my friends, is still, this drive to keep up or to fit in with culture or to do what we're supposed to do. And, culture is so ubiquitous in this world that it's actually very difficult to start to imagine what it's like outside of it. It's kind of like a fish in water. Does it even know that it's in water?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that we're swimming in?
Mm-hmm.
And so my dream for us is that more and more of us start to explore this, that we start to see the water that we're in, that we start to tune into what is true for us, and that we start to make lives that are maybe different from what we imagined for ourselves, that are different maybe from what our families or our communities imagined for us, but that bring us joy, that bring us purpose, that bring us meaning,
Mm-hmm.
and that ultimately also bring us a stronger sense of community.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing, Laura, is really your vision is for folks to really find a way to look to their own internal compass as the guide for their lives to be created from rather than an external sense of what they should do primarily, and really to look within and see what lights them up to be able to find a way forward. Does that sound like I'm on the right track?
Yeah, it's that cliched quote a little bit that to not do what the world needs, but to do what makes you come alive,
Mm-hmm.
because what the world needs is people who've come alive.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much truth in that. It's a cliche for a reason.
It is a
So
cliche
that
for a
is,
reason. I love that. Martha
you know,
Graham's quote. Yes.
so that's my dream for the community, that we find what lights us up, that what is true for us, that we start to follow, our own internal compass,
Mm-hmm.
and wherever that leads.
And so, for listeners who are trying to figure out what does that look like for me, how do I figure out what makes me come alive? How do I figure out what lights me up? What would you share with them?
I would say start with that spark. I think most of us have that little spark for something. Some of us have this kind of deep, burning, big, passion and callings. And I've always been somebody who's always known where my work kind of lies,
Mm-hmm.
even if that space didn't yet exist, even if I haven't been able to articulate it. There's always been something for me that I've known. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this is where my passion is. But that's not the case for everyone. But most of us at least have something that goes, yeah, that's really interesting, or that's really beneficial, or that's something that I would like to help with. However tiny that is in the back of our mind, however often, we push it away and go, no, I couldn't do that. Come back to that. Come back to that thought and explore what it actually feels like in our body. Is it expansive? Is it open? Does it create a sense of lightness? If it does, that's a sign. That is our guidance to start to follow that.
Mm-hmm.
And then using our body compass, we can follow that a long way. Now, there's a lot of other tools that we could look at, but for when we're just starting to look at what's true for us, that entry point to listening to the reaction of our body and our muscles and all of those little spaces that we carry with us, I think that's where the magic kind of happens. That's where we learn to see, what is true and what feels good and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. And absolutely, absolutely. And what about when folks are struggling to put food on the table? How does that, that's so important
Mm.
and so difficult. In my work with communities where there has been widespread spread, when there's been widespread economic struggle, or where the whole community really is struggling, or a lot of the spaces we work in, there's been a lot of flooding recently. You know, what does that look like? And maybe that's mutual aid or other assistance. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, I I think before we can start to look, there is an element that we need food on the table. We need a roof over our heads before we can start to really kind of look within as to what is actually going to improve my life. Where do I go to from here? Having said that, there getting free is an inside job.
Mm,
Getting free doesn't always mean that we stop working in that job that pays us for a 9 to 5 that we hate.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Getting free doesn't always mean that suddenly everything on my outside is all rosy and that the structural reality has changed.
mm-hmm,
Getting free is what allows us to then choose a different path for ourselves. It gives us more opportunities, it gives us agency, and it ends our participation in a system. Now, this is a lot easier when we have an element of privilege, when we have economic privilege, when we have security or stability in our lives.
yeah,
But this is something that we can explore wherever we are at. You
mm-hmm,
know, suffering is a driver to actually getting free in many cases. Religion has said this for thousands of years,
mm-hmm,
that we can use our suffering or we can use our love to
mm-hmm,
drive us towards what it is that is true for us.
mm-hmm,
So, how people choose to use that, or how people have the, and choose is really the wrong word there. I will actually rephrase that
mm-hmm,
how people are able to use that is different depending on where people are at in their lives
mm-hmm,
and the opportunities that they have, the experience that they have, the teachings that they have, the support that they have.
mm-hmm,
But it is still an opportunity that is available to people wherever they are at.
mm-hmm,
Now, this also isn't to say that the emphasis is on people who are economically struggling to like just get free, like if enough of us all do this, things will change. Like, no, there's enough of us actually with privilege that need to do this work of structural changes on the outside, of taking our getting free and using it out there in the world to disrupt capitalism, to look at the policies that we're doing to create systems that are helping people so that we can actually all do this work together.
mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think in those spaces, you talked about support, there's this balance of where community and tradition to some degree can really buoy and really be support and can really help provide guideposts in struggle to know where to go. There's this real tension I find sometimes with in different traditions where there's a, you know, this is what happens when, even in the herbal community here, the medicine making community here, when there's a certain struggle, then you can look towards, community traditions to know what is growing around here to help with that. So there's real beauty in tradition, and yet sometimes it can be stifling. And so when you talk about getting free, what does that look like? And there's this, tension between the beauty of the guidepost of community, and I love it personally. I love structure. And some of my siblings don't. But for me, I find freedom and structure, but I've also never felt a sense of being caged in inside, if that makes sense. Like I've talked to people who really feel caged in inside. So for me, the boundaries and the guideposts and the tradition allow a greater sense of freedom, but it can be a double edged sword, and it really depends on who the person is. So I'd love to hear what you mean a little bit more about getting free in this context.
you know, John O'Donoghue has a beautiful quote where he says, "Tradition is to community what memory is to the individual."
Mm,
And I think that kind of holds this essence of what we're talking about here. That tradition has a place. Tradition, ritual is a beautiful thing.
mm-hmm,
Rituals, I think, are deeply lacking, deeply missing in our culture, because they were markers, they were signposts, and they held spaces and experiences for a community that offered us something at the individual level and at the collective level.
mm-hmm,
So when I'm talking about getting free of culture, like one, I'm really talking about the kind of more toxic elements of our culture that exist today. The very Western neoliberal paradigm that says that growth is good, growth is success,
mm-hmm,
that the ongoing legacies of patriarchy, which manifest as imposter syndrome,
mm-hmm,
that manifest as perfectionism, that insecurity that we're not enough, that we're not good enough, the scarcity that is embedded in capitalism. That scarcity shows up in so many different ways. It shows up in our sense of our worth. That feeling that I'm not good enough is a really common one, or I'm not ready yet, I'm not there yet.
mm-hmm,
It shows up in our time. You see it in language all the time. there's not enough hours in the day, or I just can't fit it all in, or thank God it's Friday, the weekend's never long enough, whatever it might be. You have that time scarcity. And so we have these experiences that we're having, which are manifesting in things like burnout, which are manifesting in increasing depression, which is manifesting in increasing apathy when we're approaching the crises of the world. Because who am I to make a change? I can't make a difference, or it's not enough, or it's too late. So all of these are influenced by elements of our culture which aren't particularly healthy. So we're working on getting free of them. Now, this doesn't mean that we are all solo, completely independent beings that, just this hyper individualism and rely on yourself and only listen to like what is true for you at the expense of everyone around you. Instead, what's coming back to, okay, like I'm experiencing these problems, these struggles. I can see actually it's not just because I wasn't good enough. It's not just because I didn't think right. It's not just because, I didn't work effectively or I didn't practice mindfulness enough that I'm experiencing all of these issues. Actually, they're driven by culture. They're driven by the environments around us. So what would it mean to come back, to break free of them and to come back to what is true for me? And I think community and culture and tradition is a wonderful container to allow us to live our true lives when it is a healthy community, when it is a community that to an extent has broken free itself. If you're looking, there are certain religious traditions, there's certain faith groups that are very good at this. There's others that are actually not so good at this, that hold a lot of structural rules that are quite damaging. Finding this balance between them is I think this nuanced inner work that we're talking about. Do I feel safe in this community? Do I feel a sense of belonging? Is my belonging based in what I do and what I produce? Or will I belong even if I stop doing that, even if I stop producing? Do I belong based on me? Do I feel joy? Do I feel connection? Or do I feel like I'm afraid that I'm going to be rejected? Or I'm afraid that I'm going to rock the boat, that I don't quite fit in? So finding where our spaces are in community can help us create then the safety to explore what is within us. Because, it's scary. It's scary to look within. It's scary to rock the boat. We want to have the right people around us so that we're able to do that.
I love that. So I think even the analogy of the water and the boat, we're in it. We're in this cultural sea, but also determining which direction we want to go in, determining what is true for us, and then what is truly helpful. So that inner discernment is so key, and that does take the quieting and listening, and also tremendous compassion towards ourselves often. So yeah, beautifully said. So I want to move into some quick roller questions as we get ready to wrap up soon. Laura, I'd love to hear what brings you joy.
Oh, salsa dancing. My partner, she always makes me laugh. And the ocean. I think my sun, my face in the sun on like a cold winter's day. These are the big things.
Some good ones. And conversely, what keeps you moving forward on the days you struggle, however you define forward?
It's actually pausing. I think, when I have the ability to step back and to stop and to wait and say, actually, you know what, I am struggling and I don't need to keep going today. I'm just going to take care of myself right here. And to have that knowing from the people in my life that that's okay. It's okay to not be well today. It's okay to be, suffering today, and to work through that. And then the natural ability to kind of keep moving forward comes back when it is ready.
Yeah, the pause, the sacred pause. I love that. We've talked about community and friends and transition. What makes you excited about what's happening in your community, Laura?
What makes me excited is more and more people choosing the path of building a little bit, building the structures for the new world. So they're going into entrepreneurship, or they're carving out their own new role in a company or an organization. or they're talking with their community and saying, hey, don't we think this thing is needed? And, what if we were explore what it would be like together and to start to create something new? And
Mm-hmm.
that's exciting for me. I love seeing people disrupt systems. I love seeing people help people, but I also really love seeing people build new ideas and bring things to life. It's like this energy of like birthing, this energy of like bringing something new into the world. And I'm seeing that a lot lately, and that makes me excited.
Mm-hmm. It is generative. You talked about regeneration and also that energy of creating something new helps give birth to other ideas and other things, which is really great to see. What key lessons learned would you share with others who are trying to create change in their communities or regions or even themselves?
It's not your job to save the world. It's not your job to fix it. It is your job to love it. This is a really important distinction that, when we're so focused on saving and fixing, there is an energy and a domination and a paradigm that we're approaching in our mind of separation,
Mm-hmm.
of us versus them, of this, big David versus Goliath situation that we're looking at. And when we're able to change this to service, when we're able to change this to healing, when we're able to change this, not just changing the system, but transforming it,
Mm-hmm.
we change the way that we approach it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think when we change the way that we approach change, we have more possibilities, we have more opportunities. And that's on the outside as well as the inside. So
Mm-hmm.
that would be what I would say. Look, why are you looking to make the change you want to make? And what place are you making it from?
And what does that look like in your work with people when you're encouraging, and I completely agree with you, to love it, not necessarily make it different than it is. Maybe it is different, but through love, what does that look like?
I think back to when I first kind of came to this idea. I was like sitting in a yoga class and it came to me. I was like, my legs are up the wall. And it came to me for two reasons. One, I was really struggling with depression at that time, and I was in therapy, and I had this idea that I needed to like fix myself, that I was broken.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that was this paradigm shift that it wasn't about fixing myself, it was about healing. It was about allowing, it was about loving myself and allowing wholeness to emerge.
Mm-hmm.
And two, then in my own activism, like particularly in climate spheres, of focusing on like, this danger, this threat, the world is broken, it's we've got to do something, it's got to be fixed. There is an urgency, there is a stress response, there is a danger that comes with that. And what tends to happen in communities is we get so focused on the stress and the danger outside that we lose what happens between us. We lose the magic that happens between us. We lose that sense of belonging to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have that foundation of we're here because we love the world, these crises are real, the urgency is real, but we're showing up here from a different space. We're kind of breaking free of this colonial paradigm that we all carry.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have space to actually focus on our relationship. And our relationship, I really think, is where the magic happens. That is where resilience is born. That's where change is born. It's where we can start to model new experiences between us. So, this energy of moving from like saving and fixing instead to like love, service, whatever it might be, there's many others that are quite regenerative, care,
Mm-hmm.
understanding why we do the work. It gives us the capacity to stay for long haul work without burning out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that sense of separation, we look a lot at the sense of separation from Earth, but it's also separation from each other and even within ourselves. So when we come back from a place of wholeness or welcoming back or relationship, one of the outside my office window is a forest garden we planted about 10 years ago. And that experience really, in a way that I had no idea would happen, I entered into relationship with the land through that experience. And there's no other way I can describe it. It was a process of getting to know, being with, time, and I don't have expectation either. It's like
Yeah.
what grows in our forest garden grows. What makes it makes it. And it's neat to see, and it's been a sense of reciprocity as well. But there needs to be a sense of me not imposing, but listening that I didn't expect in that process. But it's still kind of the foundation of what the forest garden, it's orchard with multiple layers of plants is. It has that my relationship with the land as the core rather than plants,
Yeah.
food only. So it's an
Well,
interesting
this is the thing,
experience.
right? saving the world kind of implies that, as humans, again, that we have this like extra capacity to like save the entire everything that exists on this sphere from some unknown crisis, which isn't us. you know
Yeah.
Actually, it's really about entering into a different relationship, because if we don't start to actually enter into relationship with the earth, with the land, with each other, with other non-human species,
Mm-hmm.
then we're going to continue to recreate the problems that we're facing, because the dynamic, that underlying psyche, that underlying wound has not been healed.
Mm-hmm.
And that wound is separation. That wound says we don't belong.
Mm-hmm.
It says that, I am separate from you. And this has existed for hundreds of years,
Yeah.
probably thousands.
Yes.
But healing that, like, if we're really looking at the roots of the climate crisis, it is not just in the last couple of hundred years, it is in centuries and millennia of separation.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to really do that work of entering into relationship, of entering into reciprocity, as you're saying, to reconnect and to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
that is inner work, that's relationship work.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's joyful. It's joy building. And it's struggle sometimes too. And what do you wish someone told you, Laura, 5 or 10 years ago about this work?
Ooh, start before you're ready. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
I think somebody did tell me that. I wish I had listened to it.
Right?
That we have this idea that we need to be ready to do the things that we want to do, and that we'll be ready when we have that next certificate, when I've seen X many clients, when I finished my degree, once my when I'm this age, when I've lost this weight, or whatever it will be. We have this idea that I'll be ready then, but that day, at least in my experience, never
Not
comes.
coming.
You know,
Yeah.
we get ready by doing the thing that we want to do. We make the path by walking. So I wish that I had understood that 5 or 10 years ago, and not continue, because now is the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now is the time. So rather than continuing to kind of play at the edges or tinker, or like, just like on the fringes, I wish I had dived earlier than I did. So that would be my advice for anybody who's like, still at that stage: dive, take the step, you make the path by walking.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Gorgeous. What other thoughts or reflections would you like to share, and how can folks learn more about your work?
Mm. They can learn more about my work by going to my website, laurahartley.com. I'm also active on Instagram at laura.h.hartley, and LinkedIn, where you can find me as well. So you can learn about coaching programs, and also about some of the group programs that are coming up for internal revolution and cultural wayfinding. Now, in terms of final thoughts, I think, this has been such a beautiful conversation, and I've really loved some of the things that have arisen from this, particularly thinking back to our conversation on tradition and actually the beautiful aspects that community holds for us, that it's not just about us as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel this need now, with the world, to kind of drive home that now is the time, that wherever we're thinking that it's for 5 years from now, or 2 years from now, or 10 years, that's actually now. So come back wherever you are, find what's true for you, listen to your body, find that guidance, and take it forward into the spaces that have not yet been born, that have not yet been walked, and learn to make that path as we go, because we need each other.
Mm-hmm. We sure do. Well, Laura, what a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much for joining the We Rise podcast. It's been a delight to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, folks will have the links in the show notes on the episode webpage. So thanks again, Laura, for joining.